In this episode, I host a dialogue between Dr. Caroline Van Damme and Lama Justin von Bujdoss. Dr. Caroline Van Damme is an adult psychiatrist and family and systemic psychotherapist specializing in chronic psychotic disorders and co-teacher of Buddhist guru and Sowa Rigpa Dr. Nida Chenagtsang. Justin von Bujdoss is an American Buddhist teacher, dark retreat yogi, and founder and spiritual director of Yangti Yoga Retreat Center in Buckland, Massachusetts. Caroline and Justin discuss the risk of psychosis during extreme religious practices, consider the rewards and dangers of dark retreat, and describe the different forms of hallucination. Caroline and Justin warn about engaging in advanced practices too soon, consider the pros and cons of spiritual ambition, and offer a mental health checklist for those considering intense practice. Caroline and Justin also reflect on their own biographies, share challenges they have faced, and recount anecdotes of religious psychosis. So without further ado, Dr. Caroline Van Damme and Lama Justin von Bujdoss. Dr. Caroline Van Damme and Lama Justin von Bujdoss, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm so delighted to host the two of you here in dialogue today about dark retreat and psychosis. We've had dialogues in the past and discussions in the past and episodes and interviews in the past on this podcast about dark retreat with you, Justin, and also discussions about psychosis and religious psychosis in particular with you, Caroline. So it's very nice to have the two of you here together to cover this topic. So first of all, I think seeing as we're going to focus, at least for our starting point, on dark retreat and the relationship that has to with psychosis, perhaps, Justin, you could begin by just saying something about what is dark retreat? What is the purpose of undertaking it? What kind of experiences are expected? What's the role of special experiences in dark retreat? And how is it expected that the yogi will relate to them, if you want, in a successful dark retreat? Sort of how it's supposed to go. How is it supposed to work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Dark retreat exists in a few different contexts in the Vajrayana tradition. Most commonly, we find it within the context of dzogchen, although there are also instances of it being practiced in relationship to Kala Chakra practice, and then in some cases as a, I guess you could say, an enhancement practice for illusory body practice. Where I focus on it is within the context of dzogchen. And dzogchen, you could say, is classically divided into two, maybe you could say three aspects of practice. The first are the dzogchen preliminary practices, which include rushen and working with body, speech, and mind, sometimes guru yoga, in some cases chandali, as a way of setting a good, stable basis for a practitioner to settle into the nature of mind through Trekchod. Dark retreat exists in kind of the second or third phase of this, which is togal. And in this sense, it's a form of togal using an absence of light versus the other form of togal where one gazes at the sky, typically with the sun behind you, and visionary or visual visionary experiences happen based on one's stability in their practice and as an indicator in some cases, or a way of revealing the arising of the experience of Rigpa, or this spacious awareness. In dark retreat, the practitioner goes into a completely dark space, a dark room, in Tibet or Bhutan, at times into dark caves, to engage in there's different kinds of ways of approaching this, but basically to be in complete darkness, and over time, based on the different kinds of instructions that exist, depending on the tradition you're practicing, various kinds of visual and visionary experiences arise, all of which relate to the way, basically they're a way of pointing out the primordial purity of mind, the spaciousness of awareness. In some cases, pointing out very distinctly the relationship between conceptual mind and awareness, so Rigpa and Sem, Rigpa being awareness and Sem being conceptual mind or discursive mind. And really there's a direct experience in some cases of the purified elemental forces of the body and mind. So this can arise as different colored lights, blue lights, red lights, yellow lights, green lights, white lights. And then Bardo deities can arise, different tigles, so these kinds of circular kind of rainbow discs that can have different deities in them, different, lamas, gurus, etc. And so the whole point of this is not to, have some kind of crazy psychedelic experience and just kind of get caught up in it. It's to really directly experience all of these things as natural arising energies of the body and of the mind of the practitioner, and to settle directly into this clear Rigpa state, and essentially leap over. This is a kind of practice that Togal practices are essentially enhancement practices. So the practice of Trekchod, which is a kind of direct, stable, resting into the nature of mind in a way very similar to the way you find in Mahamudra. With Dark Retreat in particular, you're kind of like shooting ahead, so to speak, directly into the experience of the Rigpa state. And it's a practice that can be very fruitful, but then it is also a practice that can be a little fraught, because it's easy for people to become very distracted by all the visionary phenomenon, or disturbed by this kind of phenomena. And we find this warnings periodically throughout the tradition around different kinds of obstacles, or in Tibetan we would call them gek, different kind of obstacles that need to be addressed, some based on different situations happening within the constitution of the body of the practitioner. Others are more emotional, based on one's reactions to visionary phenomena that could be scary or could be very attractive. And then more kind of energetic obstacles that arise within the context of the energies of the body. And then what we might call more secret obstacles, which have to do with the discursive nature of the thoughts and reactions that are happening within the context of the practitioner. And so this really is about the degree to which you might say there's friction created in the moment between all the visual phenomena that's arising or not. It's an incredibly powerful practice. It's a very unique practice and very secret practice, I think, for a lot of different reasons. It's historically been kept very secret because of its power and profundity. It leads to a very palpable and distinct experience of the non-duality of mind. But then there are also risk factors associated with this. So we find in the text written by Jamgon Khantrul Lodro Tai and his colophon, the colophon at the end of the text, he mentions a variety of different things that can go wrong, including madness. And I have seen footnotes attributed to different teachers making the point that in some cases these practices used to be a little bit more common, but are less emphasized now because of these risk factors, right? That there's a potential, as there's a potential in a lot of different kinds of forms of meditation, to become mentally or spiritually destabilized, even though the kind of essence of the practice is meant to liberate. I'm curious about, Dr. Caroline, what you're thinking. I saw you writing something down.
Yeah, I took some notes of what you were saying to not forget what you because what I wrote down was distracted and disturbed by experiences, and I think that's where really lies the clue for where madness arises. You know, I'm going to use the word madness, but I don't like this word. But just for this conversation, may be easier. Where it becomes a problem, that those experiences become a problem, and that in the normal regular language we will use the word madness. But as a psychiatrist who is specialized in taking care of people with psychosis, with schizophrenia, I know that they don't like the word madness. I don't like the word madness. So normally I never use this word, but here I will use it to make the distinction, because I think the experiences are quite similar, but where lies the difference from having had this conversation with you before is when you are saying the distraction and this disturbed mind by all these experiences. So yeah, I think that we know that when you have sensorial deprivation, you can actually induce a psychotic state, and everybody will become psychotic at one point or another, meaning that we start to hallucinate and have delusional ideas. Usually the delusional ideas will be paranoia, because people are not expecting what's happening, and it's frightening. And well, at least for people suffering from psychosis who come to consult a psychiatrist, it's because it's scary, those experiences. So psychosis is really, or schizophrenia, to make something clear, it's really not about split personality disorder, because that's what movies make us think about. So schizophrenia is really a scattered mind. I think then it comes more closely to your distracted, disturbed words. All those experiences distract, and so people cannot find anything to hold on to and become very afraid and very fearful of those experiences. The hallucinations are usually auditory hallucinations, but what you are talking about is more visions, and so it's more visual, right? There are not many. Do you have auditory experiences, or is it only visual experiences?
This is interesting. I've had a few auditory experiences. I do know people who have had dark retreats that have had very dramatic auditory experiences. One person described to me it sounded like cars crashing, in the room. They were in a remote location, very quiet, but it sounded like these loud sounds. And you do read occasionally about these kinds of phenomena that can happen. So yes, absolutely, that is a possibility.
Yeah. So, and I suppose because you are mostly depriving yourself of visual stimuli, then it's mostly visual hallucinations that you will have, because the senses don't send any information to the brain anymore, and so the brain at one point starts to get bored and starts to create information. That's how I see the hallucinatory experience. But then people who have this vulnerability, who have the diagnosis of schizophrenia, they will have it even though there is not necessarily a deprivation. So they will have it all day long. For example, they will hear voices, scary voices, which yell at them and who call them names, and it's very scary. And for me, those voices, because it's usually voices, are so real for the person who is experiencing it. There is no point for me in trying to prove them that it's wrong. Actually, there is this story. I don't know. I don't think I told this story here in the podcast. There was this patient who went to. I don't know this person. It's a story that I've heard in my classes. There was this person who heard voices and so he was medicated by a psychiatrist and went to the pharmacist to get his medication every month. And so he told the pharmacist was very, he was like, how come you say there are voices? There are no voices here. And the patient says, yes, of course there are voices. I hear them now, and they are yelling at us, and it's definitely here. And so the pharmacist tries to prove that there is no voice there. And so the pharmacist comes with a recorder, puts the recorder on the counter, and tells the patient, you know what, we'll do an experiment. We'll go silent. We'll record what's happening in the pharmacy, and for 1 or 2 minutes. And then we'll listen to it again, and then you'll see there are no voices. And so the patient agrees, because then, you know, he thinks he can prove his point that there are voices. So they start to record in the pharmacy, they start to record what's happening, and they go silent. So afterwards they listen to the recording, and the pharmacist tells the patient, see, there are no voices here. So normally the patient would have said, oh yeah, that's true. But then what happens? The patient answers to the pharmacist, that's not normal. That means that the recorder was tricked.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happens when you try to prove to someone who has psychotic experiences. When you try to prove them wrong, they will always find a way to rationalize and explain why they are having those experiences anyways. And so the experience is real for that person. They really are voices, and that person is not capable to make the difference of the voices that are created inside his mind and the voices that come from the senses that he hears through his ears. So it's actually very stressful, because there is no way to distinguish between the two. The experience is the same. So how would we react if we would suddenly start hearing voices who start to yell at us? I know I would freak out if that would happen to me. And so, you know, that's how we are trying to help those patients, is not to try to prove them wrong, because who are we? It's their experience, and their experience is as real as my experience. Their experience is they hear voices. My experience is I don't hear voices. But that experience is very real, and how to help that person cope with that experience without getting completely drowned by it. And I think that's really the difficulty with people who suffer from psychosis, is that those voices are so invasive. I'm saying voices, but it can also be visions or whatever, a psychotic experience. It's so invasive that they cannot let it go. It really becomes nearly part of their identity. And when I hear you saying that it's very important not to get distracted or disturbed, I really think that really is what makes the difference between what we would say a real mystical experience and when people go mad, is when we take those experiences as really real and tangible experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And it also makes me think of the word devil in French is diable, in Latin is diabolo. It comes from the Greek diabolo. And diabolo means to distract.
Mm-hmm.
So I find this very fascinating, that even in the Christian tradition, the original word for devil is distraction. Yeah. And that it's distraction that brings trouble. And if you don't listen to the devil and you don't get distracted, then you can have very strong spiritual experiences.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think the thing that's the most important in dark retreat, in particular Yangti practice, is context. And the context really is, and traditionally has been, that it isn't really introduced to the practitioner until their understanding of the nature of their mind is very stable, right? So this means, like in the practice of Dzogchen, that the practitioner has a good practice of Mahamudra or Trekchod, by which kind of as the byproduct, or the kind of point of this, is to be able to have a open relationship to all sensorial experience, in which you can directly experience things, right? And you can experience the varieties of sound, form, taste, touch, etc. but you're also able to, thought, of course, as well, and emotion, but you're also able to understand all of it as empty of any inherent self-nature, right? And so the practice of Trekchod or Mahamudra is really typically a precursor, it really should be a precursor to the practice of dark retreat, so that as you go into this rather intense environment of sensory deprivation, whether it's visual phenomena that arise or auditory phenomena that arise, you already have a skill set, so to speak, by which to contextualize that which is arising, and a familiarity with this idea you find so Rangjul, or self-liberation, that things are able to come, arise, be experienced, but then also almost instantaneously liberated, meaning that we don't hold on to them, we're not attached, or we're not pushing away from them, or we're not caught in an experience of ignorance, which we could say is like a distraction or a fundamental lack of clarity around what's happening. And the point of this, being in this kind of intense environment, is precisely to settle beyond everything that's happening, right? So different kinds of, I can't begin to describe all manner of kind of visual phenomena that happen, periodically, especially during longer retreats where, animals come, you might find I remember there was one vision of this big alligator coming, right? But I was able to understand, see it very clearly, understand what was happening, and rest into this experience of the self-liberation of this form as it's happening, right? So this means that there's no objectification, or very little objectification, or we could say, like in the Buddhist tradition, I think you'd be able to accurately say that when there's no objectification of an other, right, it means that we're not splitting. The moment there's this kind of split, right, there's something that could be a threat to me, or something that is so incredibly attractive to me, or something that I don't understand and it's making me feel tentative. So why this is very interesting is I had brought up in the beginning this idea of, or concept of keksel, right, which is the way of addressing some of these obstacles. And you find literature in a lot of different traditions around how to address some of these things. Sowa Rigpa, who is one of the founders of the Yangti Yoga tradition, and Yutuk offer some very good ways of treating or dealing with these kinds of obstacles. Sowa Rigpa, especially with this experience of ignorance or namtuk, this kind of confusion based, rooted in like constant conceptual designation of everything that's arising, in that discursiveness. Like the best antidote for this is good Trekchod practice, right? Which means that there's a very good, stable understanding of the nature of our mind. And it's hard to watch, let's say, in, at least I could speak more just about the United States, about the rush that everybody is in to have these really profound kind of, penultimate spiritual experiences, even though they haven't necessarily done the work of understanding the nature of their mind. And I think that it's helpful, and it's very useful to have goals, in your spiritual practice. Like, one day I really want to do this thing, or I want to do this other thing. But it really behooves us to slow down a little bit, so that we avoid these kinds of situations where it's, whether it's, namtok or the devil, Diablo, that you end up experiencing in these retreats. Because I think the other thing, I mentioned this a little bit before we started talking together today, is that there isn't really a good basis in like mental health crisis intervention in a lot of Buddhist sanghas, right? Which I think doubly makes this very complicated. And I think that there's probably a lot of work to do to for people to be able to be trained in this. I know as my work in chaplaincy, I was trained in mental health first aid response, because it's in doing a lot of crisis response, the spiritual and the emotional and psychological get triggered in a way. But there are some really like profound risk factors that we do need to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And when you talk about having a stable Trekchod, I think that is why for a long time, but it's because of my profession, when I see what psychosis is and how disruptive it can be in someone's life and how long people take to recover from it. I told you already before, for a long time, I said, no way I would ever do a dark retreat. It's too dangerous. It's too scary. There are too many things that can go wrong. But it's because I see everything that can go wrong. I see exactly what it is. Well, of course, I don't suffer from psychosis myself, but I have so many patients for whom it's really, it's horrible. Many of my patients actually tell me I prefer to have a terminal cancer than to have psychosis, because it's so, you don't really know what's real, what's not real, and so it's really terrifying indeed. And thank God, it's for most of the people, it's not that they are always in a continuous psychotic state. It goes in it comes and goes back, and when it comes back, it's usually triggered by stressful experiences. Then psychosis becomes worse. And I think that's what you were also saying about the importance of context. Made me think of that this sensory deprivation is used as a torture method in some countries, like in Iran, I think Venezuela also, where people are put in a white room, the white room torture. I don't know why it's white room and not dark room. Maybe it's worse to be in a white room with neon lights day and night, and everything is white. Your bed is white, your clothes are white. You receive white food and you receive milk. And those people start to hallucinate very quickly, and they're political prisoners, and it's terrifying. And apparently people who have survived those kind of tortures and other more physical tortures say it's the worst torture they could have experienced is the white room torture, much worse than the physical tortures. And then my idea, when I hear that people go into dark retreats like you do and you have very different experience, I think the context makes it very different. Because of course, if you're a political prisoner, you are in a very scary situation. You don't know what's going to happen, for how long it's going to happen. You don't have any control. They also bring you food at very different moments, so you have no idea about day and night anymore, and about time. So it's not regular. And I think so the fear is so strong. Then I think also then the psychotic experiences that come out of it are really from a very different quality than when you tell about your experiences in the dark retreat, where you voluntarily went there, had a lot of preparation, know what you are going into, and then the experiences have a very different quality.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. And I think, it's fascinating because there's so many different ways based on, I guess, context even, that you can look at dark retreat. Like I've done just a little cursory kind of exploration of this. There is some literature, for example, that suggests that if you're in the dark for a certain period of time, the endogenous production of DMT happens, in the brain, which helps to cause some of these the kind of hallucinations. Some research has also kind of suggested that maybe that's what causes the dream state. When you and I spoke last about this, we also talked a little bit about dark retreat as a kind of homeopathic psychosis as a contemplative aid, right? Which I think is also interesting. And like, I want to be careful about, not necessarily relegating it to that, but looking at it within the context of Tantra more generally. There is a really fascinating use. So, for example, in Tantra, we find that yogins or yoginis tend to be asked to use things that are difficult, right, or use things that are challenging in order to help understand one's own mind. And so placing oneself intentionally in a very challenging situation like this, where a lot comes up, and like you say, after my experiences, it depends on the retreat, but usually into the third day, I lose my diurnal rhythm, and so I have no idea really what, if it's day or if it's night, or one has dreams, and then you wake up, open your eyes, and the dreams are still happening exactly like when you were asleep. For the practitioner, around which the context includes the challenging of the reality of daytime or nighttime experience, right? There's a lot of richness in this. But again, it's interesting because I was looking at some of this Gixel kind of literature in the lead up to our conversation, and in I think it's in a passage from Yutok. There's this reminder that all people are different, because even if you just look just from the standpoint of kind of Orthodox Vajrayana, because the channels in our body are different, right? The composition of the winds can be proportionally different in within practitioners, and then the tiglae are different. But then if you add to this, there's more classical, psychological or psychiatric kind of conditions as well. Our relationship to trauma can be different, right? Our emotional state can be different. I've guided people through short dark retreats, anywhere from 3 days to 7 days, and in one case 21 days. And the one thing I always advise people is to make sure your life is relatively stable right now. Like, for example, if you have a recent breakup, or you just lost your job or means of making a living, let's not start this right now, right? Like, let's not do this when you're not necessarily in a very stable place. Or even, I ask people to titrate down their reliance on social media and things like this, so that their mind, so that it's as if there's this kind of reverse on-ramp, so that their mind is increasingly stable, right, and not necessarily very agitated. And I think that you would agree that typically people who are experiencing psychosis or an intensified experience of mental illness have the opposite, right? Their mind becomes very activated, unless they're experiencing major depression or something like this. And again, like, it's fascinating to me that people tend not to consider all of this, and what's also interesting to me is that not a lot of this literature gets translated into English too. So I've been sponsoring translations of some of this literature, because I find it very interesting and important. And I think that it's a really fascinating place in the future for there to be dialogue about how to be able to present not just dark retreat, but a lot of different kinds of practices in a safe way. Because I think when we spoke last, we talked about, I was sharing some stories about very disastrous outcomes in Vipassana retreats that I'd seen in India, where and this is not uncommon, where people will come out of very intensive Vipassana retreats that are lit, so it's like this daylight kind of thing, and you're spending your whole day practicing Vipassana, maybe 10 hours, 12 hours a day, and then you come out after 10 days or 2 weeks with very little support, very little context, and you know, the effect that can have on the practitioner can be really disturbing, which is ironic because I think most people tend to assume that meditation is very healthy
Yeah.
and supportive.
Yeah, because didn't you tell me the story of that one person who defenestrated because that person thought they could fly?
Yeah, exactly. Somebody had unbeknownst to themselves, committed suicide, jumping off the roof of a 3-story building in Bodh Gaya, thinking that they could fly.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories as well. Like my root teacher told me a story of her 3-year retreat where one of the participants all of a sudden believed that they were Guru Rinpoche's consort and started attacking the other nuns. And there was very little kind of basis for how to respond outside of locking her in a closet for a while until things were able to kind of calm down and they were able to get some help to have this person removed from the retreat. I've also heard another case of a monk becoming homicidal and killing somebody in a group retreat. And again, the point of this isn't to scare people, specifically around group retreats or meditation in general. But, Steve, I come back to your interview with Dr. Britton, and Dr. Caroline and I have spoken about this too. Like, even my main takeaway from that interview, which I thought was great, was I think her point too was context is important. That the person coming to a particular meditation teacher or sangha might not necessarily fully understand that the whole goal might include the attempt to move beyond this idea of self-nature, right, or self-existing ego or self-existing identity. And if a person's just coming there to relax, maybe their doctor said, you need to relax a little bit to bring your heart rate down, and then they go to some sangha where the view, or some meditation center where the view is, you don't exist, and this person is not necessarily there for that reason, there can be a whole kind of secondary negative outcome that happens as a result. And I know that Dr. Britton has kind of received some flack, but it makes a lot of sense to me that this is another example where context is important. And in a speedy Western way, people are really kind of in a rush to have a particular kind of experience, forgetting that harm can be done the same way harm can be done while cooking. If you're cutting things too fast, or driving if you're not paying attention, the same amount of care is important.
Yeah, that's something that we learned from Dr. Nida, right? Everything can be poison or medicine depending how you use it. And what you were saying about this person who thinks they can fly, or that person who believes she's Yeshe Chogel, those are all mystical delusions, which can sometimes really be part of what we would call, as psychiatrists, a manic state. Mm-hmm. And we usually believe, manic states, that's like kind of cool or whatever. It's not very cool because it can kill people. For example, by defenestration, or they run around naked on the street, or they will kill someone because they believe they are attacking the devil. And it's not only the fear that can bring trouble, but it's also the feeling of I'm super powerful, I have superpowers, I'm a god, I'm a Buddha, and so I think it's also the distraction of getting drawn into those beliefs that can be dangerous, and that are not enough. That people don't realize enough that those are things that could happen. And then you were saying about this fact that, yes, this dissolution of the ego. Psychoanalysts, they say that people with psychosis have a weak ego, and they need to strengthen their ego. And many of my patients, they don't feel where their body ends and where their non-body starts. A long time ago, there was this guy that I would, freak out when I would shake his hand, because as soon as I would shake his hand, he would say, I don't know, now it feels like your body is me. And so that's also why you will see people with, schizophrenia. In the summer, you'll see them walk around when it's very hot outside with very thick jackets. And why do they do that? Not because, they do that to protect themselves, because then they start sweating, and by sweating, they feel the limits of their body. And so it's a sort of solution to, because they're freaking out of not feeling where their body finishes, where they're, and where the rest of the world starts. And I think when, you're doing those meditations, and Willoughby Britton talks about it, she talks about 7 domains of symptoms that can happen, and one of them is this sense of self that gets dissoluted, and that people, if they don't know that can happen, they can freak out, and then that's a negative experience. But if you do it and you are prepared for that, and you know that this might happen, like you, then it's a whole different quality of experience. I remember you told me I feel more connected when I come out of dark retreats. And I thought that was very, very nice, experience, a nice goal.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I'm about to go into one in a few days. And I look forward to that kind of experience. What you just said also kind of made me think about this idea of consent and actually this came up, I remember exactly, I think I was, Steve, like cooking dinner or something when I was listening to the podcast interview with Dr. Willoughby Britton. Because what came up for me too is this idea of consent, right? There has to be this idea that even the practitioner willingly is consenting in moving in a particular direction to perhaps the dissolution of ego or something like this, or the recognition of the true nature of mind, or the direct experience that all that arises externally and internally is illusory. Without that, I think this leads to this kind of experience of terror where all of a sudden there is no consent. I don't know why this is the case. This is just spontaneously happening. And you do find actually some accounts. I'm just thinking of this now and haven't thought about it in a while. There's a translation of Virupa's life story, this Namtar, that includes all of these like terrible visionary experiences he had, where it was as if he was basically decompensating and experiencing insanity, and it's kind of like all of the layers of the onion were being peeled away very quickly, perhaps more quickly than he could even understand or experience. So there was this kind of like fast rate of dissolution. And I think this is something that can also happen for practitioners who are consenting to going all the way with their practice and who have this context, that sometimes this process happens much more quickly, and it helps to have somebody around to provide a little bit of guidance, which I think also speaks to the importance of doing these things with a teacher or a guide or somebody who has, somebody who has more experience. I was talking with Dr. Nida in December, and he was telling me about a practitioner who came to him, a Tibetan practitioner, who was having all these very disturbing dreams. And his own interpretation of his own dreams was that they were very inauspicious. And Dr. Nida was pointing out that actually, like, what was really happening was that the dreams were indicating that winds were dissolving into different channels in this practitioner's body, and that was actually a very good sign, right? But because there wasn't that context, right? There wasn't this understanding of this Geksel, the elimination or eliminating of obstacles, kind of literature or a body of knowledge. This practitioner was a little lost and was very concerned that this was a bad thing, and after some consultation, he was able to understand, I guess you could say, what was truly happening. And I think that this also, again, just emphasizes how not beneficial it is when we're going to things in a way that's not particularly clear, right? So if we, again, for people, there have been people who have emailed me who have said, I just started meditating last year, I want to do a dark retreat. And on one level, there's a part of me that becomes scared for people like this, because it's as if they don't understand, the risk, obviously with respect to dark retreat, but there's so many risk factors for somebody who's just going to run as quickly as they can right into very intense advanced practices. But there's this adage that I love that comes from Marpa to Milarepa, which is, practice slowly, arrive quickly, which I think is really important. This idea of really slow, integrated practice, especially with getting to understand the nature of your mind, is paramount. Without this, I don't even know how much benefit there would be in a dark retreat, short of perhaps an interesting story to tell somebody.
Mm-hmm. But so when people come and ask you for dark retreats, what is their purpose when they ask you? They only have 1 year of experience and then they want to do a dark retreat. Is it because they want to have the kick of the experience, or they really want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the US there's this kind of body of practitioner base, maybe you could say, that yeah, they're extreme, practice their spirituality in an extreme way, right? Extreme, like an extreme sport, but it's extreme spirituality. And the thing that is hard about this is when somebody takes the time to stop and appreciate the development or the genesis of the initial genesis of these practices, and then the lineage transmission over a millennia, right? One develops a lot of awe and reverence for all of the energy that's taken to get these practices to this particular moment in time, right? To this particular cultural milieu even. And to rush right through that with no appreciation, that tends to rub me the wrong way, So I don't have any problem telling people, oh, I applaud your interest in this, but you need to train in order to be able to get to this point. And I can't even tell you how long that will take, because it's really personal. It's based on a person's experiences and the energy they put into this and the time. And this is not the kind of thing we can rush. I've led two people through 3-day dark retreats where it was very clear to me that they didn't have the capacity to do more than that. And I was right. And everything went okay. But the benefit, they had a good story, right? I don't know the extent to which there was really palpable kind of benefit where the nature of their mind, where the experience of Rigpa was made very clear to them, That being said, I mean, somebody who has a lot of Trekchod practice under their belt, as it were, can experience the nature of mind in a grocery store, or while driving, or while cooking for kids, or picking kids up from school. And that's really incredible too. So like there's a little bit of a kind of over obsession sometimes, I think, with practices like dark retreat or other extreme practices, because our at least in the United States, our culture, maybe we have a very kind of bipolar culture where everybody wants to rush, for the highest or the best or the most rarefied first. But I think we could all benefit from slowing down a little bit.
I think maybe the US is on the top of that, but I think contemporary society is, like when I see around me, kids cannot be bored anymore.
Yes.
I as a kid was bored very often, and then my parents said, "Well, just find a way to, just find some play," and I would invent things. And I think boredom also brings creativity. But now when I see, I'm a parent myself, so I know you are too, but how our kids are pressured to fill their time every second in that there is no boredom anymore, because in the free times then they are on the cell phones, on the smartphones. And so and even I realize that I have less of those moments of boredom than when I used. So even during our childhood, time went slower than it goes today. And so it's kind of hard to go against it and say, okay, now my kids are going to do less of all those things, because then you are going to miss things, because all the other kids are doing all those things, and then maybe your kids are being punished and not getting all the chances the others are getting. And so I think as a society we are just going too fast, and it's hard. And I'm not blaming anyone, because I know what it is, how hard it is to slow down and to accept that, okay, now for an hour I'm just not going to do anything and I'm going to be bored. I mean, you feel guilty to be bored, and I think to be able to do those kind of retreats and kind of practices that you are talking about, I think we have to learn to be bored again and to do nothing, and that's okay that we are not doing anything and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. 100% with what you're saying. It's also interesting too, because what you're describing is that there's a particular kind of trajectory of just kind of always being occupied, always being occupied, always being occupied. And then if you were to go into a dark retreat, always being occupied into nothing,
Yeah.
nothingness, just blackness, stillness, just yourself, right? What a fascinatingly different kind of experience this must have been if we compared this to, going back. So Sowa Rigpa lived in was it the 1400s, so to go back to the 1400s in Tibet, there really wasn't much going on anyway. The 1400s in most places, there really wasn't a lot going on. So for there to be this orientation towards quietude inherently in what it means to be human, relatively speaking, versus the constant busyness and then jumping right into this, I think is another fascinating thing that might need to be addressed with these kinds of practices, that a mind that is constantly occupied and always moving, when immediately placed into a place of stillness, is going to potentially experience quite a bit of disturbance or even lack of orientation, which may be good for somebody who is oriented towards tantric Buddhist practice, but for the person who has not done a good job of really truly assessing where they're at in terms of their practice, it could be not the right thing. So I think I often actually think this, I'm glad you brought it up, like how many people will achieve liberation in one lifetime because we're constantly looking at our phones and iPads and all this kind of stuff. Like, what is there a detrimental effect to this, or is all of that just the play of mind as well. Fascinating.
Mhm.
Here's a question.
Mhm.
One thing I've noticed talking to people about religion and spiritual practice and that sort of thing is that sometimes what people say they want isn't quite what they want. In other words, one gets the idea that something, maybe a practice, maybe an experience, maybe an attainment, it sort of represents something in the mind of the practitioner because they've come across it, they've heard it. Classic one that often comes up in sort of more Theravada context is stream entry. This first of the 4 path attainments, going all the way up to Arhat and so on. And often people will say, this is sort of internet thing, gunning for stream entry, right? They're aiming for a certain thing. What they really want isn't that at all. I can't tell you the number of people who've told me they want stream entry, and I've questioned them to find what they really want, and what they describe they want is nothing to do with stream entry at all, really. Or maybe it's jhanas. They've heard of these special states called the jhanas, 4, 8, and they would like to get into those and work towards those, etc. And sometimes people want to do those things and they understand what they are, but sometimes people want to do them because they've just sort of accepted that that's the thing to go for. So let's say someone is really keen on doing dark retreat. They've heard a podcast, maybe our podcasts, Justin, where we talked about dark retreat, and they think, this is for me. I've done my ayahuasca. I've done my frog venom. I want the dark retreat. Mm-hmm. What other things might they try first? What are other things they might try? It occurs to me, for example, if you want to do a double-digit dark retreat, you should at least do a few double-digit lights-on retreats. Oh, and if you get psychotic on one of those, maybe then a dark retreat is not for you. So what other things? And what if we might, in other words, lean into the spiritual materialism and lay out a menu of alternatives to dark retreat for the spiritually enthusiastic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, there's so many practices. I mean, this is the one thing Vajrayana has, no shortage of. So one practice that I find incredibly beautiful and also potentially quite vast is traditional Yidam practice. So especially as you find it with Yidam practices that have outer, inner, and secret levels, right? And the reason why this is quite helpful, I mean, first there's Nundro. So we could say, do a Nundro retreat, right? And so in the Yutuk Nintik, there's a 7-day Nundro. In most other Nundro practices, though, you do 111,000 of the 4 major practices, in Nundro. So refuge and prostrations, Vajrasattva, Mandala offerings, and Guru Yoga, typically. That's a great place to start, right? And that will take years. And if somebody's really interested in working those muscles, so to speak, I mean, what a great practice. But Yidam practice is quite powerful in the sense of transforming body, speech, and mind into that of a particular deity. If you do outer, inner, and secret Yidam practice, this means that one will usually have several million mantras accumulated, and the practice deepens in a really beautiful way. Beautiful, gradual, very mystical, very powerful, in a lit world, with this opportunity of bringing it off the cushion into all phases of our lives, with powerful dream experiences involved. But what's interesting is that a lot of the kind of depth of these practices have a lot to do with just putting in a lot of time And over time, what was previously very secret begins to kind of unfold in the experience of the practitioner. I'm a huge fan of Tilopa's 6 nails, like a very, very basic meditation instruction that's often used at the beginning of the teaching of shamatha, but is in and of itself a very profound Mahamudra instruction as well. And this I've spent 30 years, with this practice. In the beginning, being very bored by it. There are only 6 instructions, and over time, really appreciating the depth and the profundity of what it means to let go of control, right? To be able to experience my mind, to experience phenomena without trying to control it, without trying to define it, without trying to measure it. Even, I mean, this is really fascinating, Steve, this question, because like a lot of the delineations in terms of practice are really conceptual. So like if you practice a good amount of shamatha, like especially in a Vajrayana kind of context, it's very natural that at a certain point, once a sense of quiescence has been achieved, that then mind becomes aware of itself, which is this good experience of Vipassana, which then can lead into the practice of Mahamudra as well. But where I'm going with this is slow, slow and deliberate. The irony, Vajrayana is said to be a quote unquote fast tradition, right? And there are a lot of there's a lot of language around how fast some of these traditions are. I think they are very fast if you can relax into being slow and deliberate at the beginning, right? Really kind of taking your time. And I think that would be an interesting thing to kind of, throw towards these people that are, really driven by spiritual materialism. Like, how slow and deliberate can I be? Kind of flipping it back in that direction. Kind of like the people, I can't remember, is it called raw dogging it? Like those people who on long flights will just do nothing. Yeah. So to like raw dog your spirituality and just be deliberately bound to one thing for some time, or 2 things. But even things like lojong, if you can really just focus your time and bring a sense of everyday awareness to lojong, it's quite powerful. There's plenty of room for distraction in all of these practices, but there's plenty of room for distraction in every kind of spiritual practice of all faith traditions, I think. But I think if somebody really wanted to kind of like demonstrate their spiritual machismo, I would encourage them to do it in a slow way, right? Show me how slow you can be. Show me how bulky your practice can be in a slow and deliberate way. I love practices like dream yoga, and practices like illusory body, but sometimes I think that there's almost more room for people to become distracted by their own expectations or their attachments, kind of like what you're saying about like the outcome. Oh, I really want to, like illusory body practice, I've always found very, very powerful, but it is very intense to really get into that practice and experience self and other as illusion. Like I did a retreat of this in Sikkim once, and went, my wife came out to visit me. We were engaged at the time, and I had to go to Delhi to go pick her up, and I just came out of this illusory body retreat and had to go down the hill from Sikkim down to the plains to take a train across India. And in the jeep ride down the mountains to the plains, everything was this kind of like conjoined illusion, where Dr. Caroline, like I couldn't find the difference between myself and the the Jeep driver and the Jeep itself, and that was the context, and I was okay with that, right? But as you point out, Steve, like I wanted that. I was intentionally, doing the practice to be able to experience this versus the person who, oh, I want to do illusory body because it's very rare. And then you have the experience and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, like this is actually not what I wanted. This feels very uncomfortable. I don't feel particularly grounded, walking meditation, there's not necessarily a huge tradition of it in Vajrayana necessarily, but I've had a really good experience with that. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
Well, as you're talking, I'm reminded of one of my teacher's rubrics for practice, Shinzen Young. He talks about frequency, duration, and intensity as variables, knobs to tweak, if you like, to modulate one's practice. Frequency, how often do you practice? Duration, how long do you practice in each session? And intensity, that can mean many different things. For example, in sitting meditation, it might mean not moving at all, not even to scratch your nose. That would be a condition you could impose upon yourself for your sit, however long it is, to increase the intensity. There are various other intensities, like, for example, turning all the lights off and not coming out for 49 days or something like that, right? That's another kind of intensifier. Certain conditions that you place on yourself, fasting, sleep deprivation, etc. All of these are tried and tested spiritual intensification techniques. And of course, just like any high intensity activity, they come with a risk of injury. That's, in a sense, an inevitable risk that one takes in any high intensity activity. So when you say go slow, so someone's very enthusiastic, they're very passionate, they're full of spiritual ambition and hope, but it's raw, and they're untutored, and they don't have skill in cutting through experience or relating to their emotional states, etc. But for whatever reason, they're very passionate. And you say to them, go slow. Mm-hmm. What does that mean in terms of frequency, duration, and intensity? For example, I might ask the question to such a person, what is your daily practice at the moment? And quite often such a person won't have a daily practice. Mm-hmm. So that's something that can be channeled there. And what is it? Is it 20 minutes of running through a sadhana? Or is it, 2 to 3 hours before work? These are different levels of duration, for example. These are some of the things that occur to me as you ask what I think. I probably, first of all, want to be diagnostic about what they're actually doing. What is their actual level? And see if there are any obvious opportunities to channel that passion, that ambition, in a sort of productive way. Because if we wait for them to be detached from ambition and passion and spiritual materialism, that may never happen.
Yeah, and but yeah, that's true. I think ambition, ambition's an interesting thing. I don't think ambition is bad, right? But I do think that ambition oftentimes needs to be tempered, and I know that with myself it had to be tempered too. I think on one level, like I remember going to meet my teachers and invariably always wanting to bite off more than I could chew. And very gratefully, although maybe not necessarily perceiving it that way at the time, them slowing me down. Okay, like, yeah, you'd like to do that. Do, the full, Karmakaju Nundro. Oh, I want to do it quickly. Okay, then let's do it in retreat. I had my one of my early teachers when I did the Karmakaju retreat, the Nundro in retreat at his hermitage in Sikkim, and he started my Dharma brother and I off with 1,200 prostrations a day. He's like, if you want to do this, fine. You need to do 1,200 prostration every day, 1,200 prostrations. And, we were full of youthful vigor and ambition and did 1,100 and injured ourselves, and then asked to slow down. And he said, you can have one day off and then do your 1,200 and 1,200 and 1,200 every day, and we did that, and it was very humbling, right? By being kind of like forced to put your put your money where your mouth is. I think ambition can help us chart like a long-term course that can be helpful for some people. But I agree with you, in the kind of like modern context, most people who are in a rush to do dark retreat maybe, sit for 20 minutes a day, maybe not every day. And so I think you're right to build up the tolerance, as it were, or to, build one's practice is a helpful thing. I mean, it ends up being vital because so for example, with Mahamudra, like you can't, Mahamudra without some stability in shamatha is, you can have moments of clarity that are taken away instantly by distraction, right? And so I think a good technique that's helpful for people is also beginning to kind of educate people around why these practices exist, right? Like in some cases, people don't understand, and they want to get from point A to point Z in 1 year. And the slow teaching of people, the why, like why this is this way, taking time to instill this is important. Is this the kind of thing that everybody's going to respond well to? No. There's always going to be somebody who's willing to teach somebody, things that might not necessarily be the most helpful for them. But then at the same time, like that's could be part of the journey of that particular kind of practitioner as well, to kind of, you hit a wall because you can't go any further because you don't have the discipline or the training or the ability to understand what's happening or the context. And maybe sometimes a practitioner needs to do that in order to hit the wall and then come back and start again. I mean, this is called discipline. And it's kind of like a dirty word sometimes these days, where people really want the like quick scratch off kind of spiritual practice, but discipline is really important. And usually it might not necessarily feel that way in the beginning, but at some point, then, we can turn back and look back at our practice life and say, oh my gosh, this is, I'm so happy, that I had this experience of a disciplined presentation, without a good basis, like a good foundation, a lot of practice seems to falter. This is kind of my experience where practices like Nundro, for example, seem so basic to people sometimes and ordinary and boring, but it really is such a vital kind of practice, very, very strong. I mean, hours and hours and hours put in doing Mahamudra or Trekchod. Yeah, you have to confront your own boredom. You have to confront, your doubt. Like, oh my gosh, is this, while sitting, thinking or wondering, like, what is the point of this? And kind of working through like our own experience of barrenness, or the kind of the different kinds of dark, the dark woods of our mind, to kind of go through that. And again, the thing that maybe we could say helps provide the ultimate context in this is relative bodhicitta, right? Why do we do this? So in the Vajrayana tradition, we do this so that we can aid in the liberation of all beings. And if I've gone through the process of really working through the intensity of my own mind and the intensity of my conceptuality, the intensity of discursiveness, the intensity of labeling and projections, the intensity of fear and anxiety, if I've been able to navigate that, right, and move through that and understand that and have clarity, then that is a skill set I can then share with others, right? And that's why the long slog is ultimately beneficial. My root teacher once told me, like, you know, I hope you have a long and painful life, and like as a kind of aspiration. And I was, you know, I was completely like flummoxed by it. And the whole point of it, she said, was, if you have a long and painful life, and it is hard, and you go through all these challenges, and you're even tormented, right? And you get through that, you will be able to be there for others who are going through the same thing. Like, you will be able to guide people through this. And in fact, actually, Dr. Caroline, there's a story, I don't know how true this is, but one of my teachers was the previous Bokor Rinpoche, who was a real master of Mahamudra, and he was the retreat master for the Karma Kagyu tradition. And there was this story circulating, I have no idea if it was true or not, but that during his second long cloistered retreat, that he experienced temporary insanity, and then came through it okay. And I remember hearing that story, and I think it was after he had passed, so there really wasn't any way I could corroborate it. But I thought to myself, like, you know, what an incredible teacher to have, you know, somebody who went through this whole experience, right, who was a meditation master, who had experienced this, potentially, if the story is true, this intense suffering born of mind, and made it through, right? What an incredible teacher, what an incredible guide, as opposed to having a teacher who never went through anything like that, had no experience of how intense the mind could be. I think this is somewhere where there's like a little bit of an alchemical transmutation that happens if we peg everything that we're doing towards its relationship to relative bodhicitta, right? This aspiration to liberate all beings, and not in a grandiose way, but in a healthy, integrated way, then all hardship that we experience can be very beneficial.
Dr. Caroline, as a psychiatrist, if someone wants to do an intense experience, an extreme experience of some type, and there are many extreme experiences, some people do ultra marathons back to back, etc., and have to have medical checkups in advance of that, or they do some other kinds of experiences. Let's say somebody comes to you and they really want to do some extreme spiritual experiences, some spiritual adventures. They want to do maybe some dark retreat, or they want to do some long retreats, or they want to do fasting and, you know, hair shirts and whatnot. Is there a checklist that one ought to go through, mental health-wise, to see if it's a good idea to embark upon such a thing?
Well, I don't know if there exists some official mental health checklist. Probably it does exist already, but not to my knowledge. But what I would do is what we do when people want to get hospitalized for psychotherapy, for long psychotherapy hospitalizations. And one of the things we do an intake of that person. And the first thing we ask is, what is your objective? Why do you want to do this? What do you want to gain? And of course, I'm not a spiritual teacher. So what I would also ask the person is, do you have a good teacher that is recognized, part of a lineage? Because I think today I have some patients who are in this situation, if this whole, I don't know, neuro-spiritual wellness kind of things, they go from one teacher to another, and it's like they are shopping. And I wouldn't go to an intensive retreat to start with if teacher, you barely know the teacher. And I think it's important to find a good, genuine teacher that has a long lineage, that is based in a tradition. And so That is what I recommend to my patients who want to go for more spiritual practices, but who have had psychotic breakdowns. Is I ask them, I insist that they find a teacher that has that comes from a long tradition where where the risks are also known, and so that the teacher gets to know also the person who wants to do it and can have a conversation. And the first thing is and that's what we do in psychiatry when people want to start intensive psychotherapy and things like that, is why do you want to do this, and discuss together, ask questions to really find out what the real goal, because then it makes me think, when I went to go for my training as a psychotherapist, as a family therapist, I had to go through an intake with the teacher. And the teacher, so she asked me, why do you want to take this course? And I just said, oh, I want to be able to help my patients. Why do you want to help your patients? And she just kept asking me questions and questions and questions, and also about my own history. How are things in your family? And actually she made me answer questions that I was trying to avoid myself. And she uncovered certain things about myself that were very uncomfortable and that made me very uncomfortable. And I was like, I really don't want to talk about this. So I gave very, how do you say that in English? I gave very simple answers that everybody would say, and she wouldn't let me go with those answers. She would dig in, and she said, I'm not satisfied with that answer. And so I spoke with her for more than an hour, until I could, for myself, really find out what my real motivations were to take this training. And I think that's a good teacher. She made me go through very uncomfortable parts of myself that I had been avoiding for a long time, and she had uncovered them by talking to me. And I think that's also what I would say as a good Dharma teacher, is someone who can bring you in a safe way to the uncomfortable parts of yourself that you're trying to avoid, in order to avoid the spiritual bypass. Because when I go to retreats and I meet people in Dharma centers, oh my God, there's so much spiritual bypass around me. I'm like, oh my God. But I understand, those people are searching for solutions for their psychological issues. They just don't realize it. They're trying, they say I'm a spiritual seeker, but in fact, they are struggling with their mental health, and they are finding solutions in spiritual retreats. So I think then the job of the teacher is to uncover that, and it's fine but at least to not lie to ourselves why we want to do those practices, and be very honest about it. And we have blind spots. We all have blind spots, and so we all we try to create an identity of ourselves as we are the good person, we are the smart person, we know what we're doing, and the good teacher will, as you were talking about one of your teachers, Lama Justin, who will poke us all the way until we realize that, well, maybe that image that we have of ourselves might not be completely the true story, and there are some hidden parts of ourselves that we are, that we have to face. And I think that's really the purpose of spiritual practice also, is to really get to know ourselves, including all the dark spaces that we don't really like or enjoy. And so that would be, for me, a very important thing, is to really find a very good teacher who is very rooted in reality, who is not only, not only in the theory, but also has a good understanding of what a human being is and how we function, and cultivate patience. I think that's about the going slow. I think that's what, of course, I'm absolutely not a Dharma teacher, but I guide my patients on the long term. I have a long-term relationship with my patients, and I see what works is that they feel safe, to really have a safe space in my office. And what we talk a lot about, and that is very frustrating for many people, is patience. To take time and patience, and that gradually and have confidence in give time to the time, and that things that seem completely unsolvable for the moment might suddenly change in the future, because that's impermanence, right? Things do change, and don't stay fixated on the same. And I think if we have this trust in that change can come, and that things are fine as they are right now, but be patient, and we won't have all the results that we want in one night. That, you know, we need time. We need to give time to time. There is no rush. We don't need to be. We are not competing with other people. But so yeah, it's to. I would say it's really find a good teacher and stick to that teacher, and not start to go from one place to another, and then that is a book that I read a few years ago from John Welwood. I don't know if you know John Welwood. I have it in French here, but I don't know what the title in English is. Psychology of Illumination, or I don't know what the word is in English, of enlightenment, psychology of enlightenment. And he argues that, because he also speaks a lot about spiritual bypass in Dharma centers and things like that. And he argues that in today's society, one of the Gondor practices that we should add is psychotherapy. That instead of just doing all those Gondor practices that are traditional, is to add an extra one, is go see a psychotherapist, and also a good psychotherapist who will help us see parts of ourselves and really work on ourselves. And he actually argues to also, you know, strengthen our ego first, before we can actually go through all those practices, more advanced practices, which will actually help us dissolve the sense of self. But we need a strong sense of sense to start with. And so he actually gives the argument of doing a psychotherapy, as we say for people who do a psychotherapy training. When you're doing psychotherapy training, so I was trained as a family therapist, is to do learning therapy, is to go to do a psychotherapy next to the training, to have the experience. And I think, Lama Justin, what you were saying about having had the experiences ourselves makes it more, we connect more to people who go through pain and suffering, because we recognize it in ourselves, and then we are better able to help them. And we see this now also in the evolution of psychiatry. More and more we are training people who, I don't know how you call them in English, who have experienced, for example, psychosis, people who have the diagnosis of schizophrenia, who are trained to become peer experiencers, and who are actually hired in hospitals or other places to actually be part of a team to take care of this particular group. And so I really think it's a very positive add-on to have someone who has experienced such things in a team. It makes it also more challenging, because of course they see things from a patient point of view, and we only, and that's the very interesting. So I really think that people who have been through the difficulties, they can indeed use that knowledge to guide other people. And so if you're saying that Bokar Rinpoche had gone through a phase of insanity, then I think that's amazing, because he also found a way out, and so he can help and guide people who might possibly, you know, fall into. He can recognize on time the traps that will bring someone into insanity, and if that person is already in there, also guide that person. I usually say patient, but that person out of it to out of insanity, and then in this case into enlightenment. And I think that's really amazing. And
Yeah. No, Dr. Caroline, the what you just described, especially this like the therapeutic relationship between the psychiatrist or psychotherapist and the patient long term, is, I think, what, maybe not necessarily obviously in the same way, but kind of the old school I guess practice basis was that people would have long-term relationships with a teacher that they would see, regularly. I don't know what the frequency, I'm sure, would vary, but over a long period of time, so that the teacher would be able to say, I notice you're avoiding doing all of these things. Let's what's that about? The same way a therapist might, or like you pointed out about your professor who is really kind of poking you about, why do you want to do this? Like, what is your family life like? All this kind of stuff. And it is interesting, like, the degree to which maybe the Buddhist world, for example, in this case, has changed so quickly that there is a loss of this kind of relationship that is that I do like this idea of adding psychotherapy to Nundro practice at the very least, in a way of kind of trying to reclaim almost like, teacher as accountability partner as much as teacher of Dharma, right? So where there's somebody who is journeying with you as you are journeying through your practice and your life, to be able to help support you or support the practitioner when it's clear that they need that extra support. I think that is, I'm not going to say it's like missing everywhere, because I do know that some teachers really kind of go out of their way to make themselves available for people, but it is kind of maybe you could say sometimes a missed ingredient for people.
But I see it also as a psychiatrist. I'm one of the very few psychiatrists who follows her patient on the long term. So once they get hospitalized, afterwards I remain their psychiatrist for many years. So I've had some patients for 20 years. So we grow up together, It's like, but it's really helpful, because, those patients that I know very well, I know immediately. They don't need to tell me anything. I know immediately when they're not doing well. They enter my office and I see on their face, okay, there's a problem here. And but if I don't know the patient, then not. And so I don't need all those checklists and questionnaires. I know immediately, and I know immediately when the problem is big enough that I need to refer that patient to hospitalization or to the emergency room, and then I know who to contact, and that's because I know that person. And someone else with the same reactions, I might not be worried at all for that person, because I know that for that person, those reactions are those attitudes are part of who that person is. I might have someone who is always joyful, and then comes one day in my office with a very sad face, and I know immediately there's a problem. But the other way around might be true too. I might have someone who is by nature always sad, and suddenly comes very joyfully in my office, but might be a first sign of a manic decompensation. So I think it's really helpful and useful to have a teacher who knows their students, who knows their personalities, and then who can also guide them into the right practice at the right time, because sometimes a practice might be right for them, but not now. First, it's important to do something else, whereas another student might do that practice immediately because that student is ready with their... And so I think it's not like school where everybody goes from first grade to second grade to third grade, and you need to at the same speed. I think we're so different. Everybody is so different. And that's the beautiful thing about Vajrayana, is that there are so many different practices that you can really adapt the right practice to the right person at the right time, at the right moment. But for that, you need to know the practices and you need to know people. You need to know how people function to be able to guide them. But then if you find a teacher like that, then that's just amazing. And then maybe if you are super ambitious, to come back to your question, Stephen, if you are someone who will go very fast, and that the teacher knows that that person will put everything and that person is stable enough to do it, then that's great for that person. But for many other person, it might be very dangerous to go immediately into those very extreme practices, and some preparation might be necessary. So I think it really depends on the person and the teacher.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was really well said too. And I think that, you know, the power of being in relationship is huge in this, and really can't be eliminated from the equation. As it were, I remember right before I went into my first dark retreat, and Dr. Nida told me about somebody who had come to him, who was kind of seeking support around having become psychotic from a teacher who just put him right into dark retreat. You know, just met the teacher, and the teacher was like, "Oh, you should do a dark retreat," and not really having much of a relationship. And you know, maybe you could say this is a little bit of a misread, you know, and it was a real kind of eye opener to me about trust, right? Like myself in that moment, you know, knowing that, okay, I need to trust you, you know, who are saying I should do this retreat, and then recognizing the importance of that. Again, you know, in our speedy world these days, it's so hard for people to actually even take the time to develop these relationships, especially because there's a lot of difficult emotion, especially for very ambitious people. If you feel like you're not showing up well or performing well, to you know, disappear rather than kind of, you know, have the teacher or whoever you're in relationship with interrogate you a little bit about, you know, going deeper, trying harder, you know, trying to suss out what needs to be addressed. You know.
Yeah, I think human beings are social beings. And if we know from experiments that have been done in the 60s, if you take a monkey and you remove the monkey from their mother, and have no other contact, then the monkey will just die out of depression and self-harm and becoming anxious and all those symptoms that we see as psychiatrists. So for me, the basic requirement is to have a good, you know, trusting, safe relationship with a teacher where we know that nothing can go wrong, that we can trust that teacher, that teacher is never going to harm us and will guide us whatever happens. And I see this also with my patients, is that my words are so important. So, you know, when something goes wrong and they are very stressed out, and I can reassure them and say, don't worry, things will get better. I know they will get better, because they trust me. Just those words, they listen, they already get better because I'm saying that. And if I didn't have that relationship with them, those words would just be empty, wouldn't mean anything, and the person would not trust me and continue to worry, because how does she know that I'm going to get better? She doesn't know me. So I think, yeah, for me personally, this is really a basic requirement, is to really have this trusting relationship with the teacher. And I'm not talking about blind trust. I'm talking about
Yes.
because that's also a danger. The people throw themselves, and that's the perfect teacher, and they haven't checked out well enough, and they see all this magic and it's exotic, and then they believe, and then they give all their personality, the whole person to that teacher, and then that teacher, can do whatever they want with them. And so I think that's dangerous too. So we need to be trusting, but keep, still keep our feet in reality, and check people out before we, like Dr. Nida say, Google them. I think that's a great first step.
That is a really good first step. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This has been a very interesting discussion indeed. I wonder if you have any final closing remarks, either of you. You needn't necessarily have. Is there anything you'd like to say before we bring this to an end?
I mean, I guess I'll say this. I mean, I think, Dr. Caroline, the thing I love about this conversation is just the importance of being thorough in the way we show up to Dharma practice, and that includes psychological health. And I've been in or around a lot of different, like, very orthodox, traditional Vajrayana sanghas, where maybe we could say sometimes there isn't always the highest level of attention around that, the relative psychological health of any kind of practitioner who shows up into the sangha or in relationship to teachers. And I'm very heartened by our conversation and highlighting this, because I think it is increasingly important. I think dark retreat is an incredible practice, and I think that a lot of people can get, enter into this practice over time. But I also think, and I agree with all of these past masters like Jongkun Khantrul Lodrötai and others, that there's even Dongtso Rinpoche points this out. Like, one of the worst detriments to practice of dark retreat is rushing into it. You can't you can't cut corners with this because it's so intense. But I also have a lot of faith in most people who really show up to their practice in a thorough way, and in an integrated way. And I think this conversation has been great around isolating different approaches to that and the importance of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lama Justin. And for me, coming from medical tradition, as a psychiatrist working with psychosis, for a long time, I didn't dare to tell my colleagues that, I was into spiritual practice and going to Buddhist retreats and things like that. And now I start to talk about it, and I see that around me, from colleagues and from students, there is a big interest in spirituality, but people have no clue, they have no idea. And I'm absolutely not an expert, but they see me as the expert because they know no one else who is into those things. And so the thing is, there are also a lot of practices out there which can be so dangerous, and where people can get abused in different ways, or where they can, as you say, have psychotic breaks and have suicides, commit suicide. And I think we as doctors, we need to be aware of all those things. And I now have colleagues who start to ask me to go and give lectures on the subject, because they have no idea about what's going on, and patients don't dare to go to their doctors and explain what happened to them, because they think they will be not taken seriously. But I think we are not helping our patients if they hide certain information from us. And so I see there is really this change of mindset. People are opening up to spiritual practices, but then as doctors, we want to make sure that we are not harming our patient and that we guide them well. And so I think also from that side, there is more interest, not only from Dharma practitioners or spiritual teachers, but also from the medical establishment, that, okay, there is something going on there, and we need to be able to help those people. So whether they be psychiatrists or psychologists, that we know what's happening, we know what the risks are, And so that's why I also think that having a conversation like this with you, speaking from first person's perspective of what you have gone through, what you have experienced, for people who don't know about all those things and who have to know about also the risks, I think it's great. And thank you, Steve, for making this possible, for making this conversation possible, because I think it's really, for the moment, it's still a dark spot, at least for the medical, psychiatric, psychological sides. We don't know enough about it yet, and it's time that we have those conversations more often.
Well, Dr. Caroline Van Damme and Lama Justin von Bujdoss, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.